Yes, I love this land. It takes my breath away.
Welcome to Texas 10. I'm M'lissa.
And I'm Steve.
And we love all things Texas. We've been traveling the state and have been to all 254 counties. And you know what? You find out there are great stories in Texas.
There are, and there's also a great soundtrack to Texas.
There is a great soundtrack, and there are great musicians that come from Texas.
Right. And so we're here today with Kirby Warnock, who's been with us before. Mm-hmm. And we talked about Return to Giant, his film. He's an independent filmmaker that made Return to Giant. And he returned to the big screen with Brothers in Blues. And so, Kirby, can you say hi to the folks?
Greetings. Good to see everybody. Thank you all for having me.
Okay, no pun intended, but you struck a chord with me with Brothers in Blues. It is fantastic, and the soundtrack is amazing.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about what was your inspiration to make this particular documentary.
Well, back in the 70s, after I graduated from Baylor, I worked for a music magazine up in Dallas, Texas called Buddy Magazine. It was named after Buddy Holly, the first rock and roll star from Texas. It was owned by a guy named Stoney Burns, who was pretty much a radical hippie who got arrested all the time. And he got being beat up, so he started a music magazine. And I was the editor there from 1976 to 1982. And it was my job to go to see musicians and write about them. And I remember the first time I saw Jimmie Vaughan, the Fabulous Thunderbirds play, I was just thunderstruck. And as I was walking back to the car with Stoney, the publisher, I said, I've never seen anybody play a guitar like that. And he said, well, he's got a younger brother who's even better than he is. Mm-hmm. And so I saw Stevie play a few weeks later. And again, I was just dumbstruck because they were playing dumpy little clubs back then. These were not nice places with bottle service or any of that stuff. You know? These were dumpy clubs in Texas. And I thought, why aren't these guys famous? I said, they are just incredible. And it was much like seeing Elvis, because I just saw people who were just they were so talented. I just couldn't believe they weren't getting a big record deal. Why didn't everybody know about them? And then eventually they did get a record deal. They both, got to the top. And I just always felt like their story had not really been told. And really the biggest reason was Jimmie would not cooperate with anybody trying to do a documentary about Stevie. The only documentary I knew about Stevie was one called Lone Star. It's on streaming services from several years ago. But he didn't cooperate with that. And so I spent years trying to get him to cooperate with me so we could make a film about him and Stevie. Because what I saw that Jimmie was the one that taught Stevie how to play. Wow. And I kept continuing. There would be no Stevie Ray Vaughan if there was no Jimmie Vaughan. Mm-hmm. And so I said, we've got to tell both their stories. I can't just tell the Stevie story without showing Jimmie too. And finally I got Jimmie to agree to cooperate with me. I said, if you don't do this, one day you're going to be dead and people will be able to say whatever they want and you won't be here to say, no, that's not what happened. And he agreed to do it with me. So then from there, we started working and got the interviews with Eric Clapton, Jackson Browne, Billy Gibbons, Nile Rodgers, all these famous musicians that worked with them. And then also I had been seeing a lot of their former bandmates when they were first starting out. I knew a lot of them. And I said, I want y'all to tell your story too, because you were with them before they got to be famous. But yet back then you knew they were going to make it,
So Good sentence, Steve. But what I was going to say is you referred to their bandmates, and a lot of it grew up in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas. And the story tells a great story of the brothers, Jimmie and Stevie, and what you were saying, sort of how they inspired each other, their love for each other, all of that sort of stuff. But it also does a great job of giving a picture of Oak Cliff in that particular era and how it meshed with the music scene there. So talk a little bit about your ties to Dallas, and I know you told us about the magazine, but just sort of what the music scene was like in Dallas at the time that the brothers were coming up.
Yes, and that's one thing. Most people think that they were from Austin, but no, they honed their craft in Dallas. Then they moved to Austin. You know, they were already very accomplished guitar players when they went to Austin. You know, that was not where they, learned their chops. They learned all in Dallas. And I made a little documentary called When Dallas Rocked that is available for free on YouTube. It aired on PBS stations, and I put it on YouTube. But at one time, Dallas was a bigger music town than Austin was. A lot of people don't know that. But back in the 50s, 60s, and on to the 70s, Dallas had more of the music business up there than Austin did. And so that was where everybody was coming to try to make it. They had a lot of the clubs. But the biggest thing they had was that all the major record labels had offices in Dallas. If you bought and this is back when you had to buy a vinyl record of your music. If you bought a record, an album, and you lived in Louisiana, Oklahoma, Texas, or New Mexico, it came from a warehouse in Dallas. And so Dallas had a lot of clout back then. And also they had a lot of big clubs that were paying really, really well for bands. There's the thing in Austin, there were a lot of places to play, but most of them didn't pay you. You know, in Austin back then, they starved. But Dallas was a huge music town, and Oak Cliff was very big too because it had produced some really good musicians. Michael Martin Murphey, B.W. Stevenson. So you had a lot of people that came from the Oak Cliff scene. And so you could kind of make it if you came from Oak Cliff. But then it all eventually changed. Music quit being sold on vinyl. It started streaming. And the musicians slowly moved down to Austin. And so it kind of much drifted down there. But we showed this in the film, how heavy and hot a music scene Dallas, and particularly Oak Cliff had in the 50s and 60s.
Well, and you mentioned B.W. Stevenson. I'm just going to segue real quick. My Maria is one of my favorite songs of all time by the great B.W. Stevenson. So, there was super abundance of talent there. And you say talent, and one of the interesting things to me in the movie was what you did with some of the interviews is the people that played with them when they were in Oak Cliff, they're not just talking. They have their guitars with them, and they'll play riffs and stuff. Was that a conscious decision on your part, or how did you come to film it that way?
It was, because I wanted to show that back then you had to actually learn how to play a guitar to get famous.
Right.
You couldn't just go on some reality show like the Kardashians. You actually had talent. And I consciously asked every guy to bring a guitar. I said, I want you to show me the first licks you learned on a guitar. Show me the first song you learned. And so that was a conscious decision on my part to show that these guys actually knew how to play an instrument, They didn't just go... Well, I don't like to say this. They didn't just go show their ass on TV.
Right. Well, one of the things I loved was it talked about the family, and Jimmie talked about, his parents and how musical they were. And so kids were brought up very differently, and it was a different time, obviously, and music was in the home. So talk a little bit about that, the importance of what inspired Jimmie and Stevie Ray. How did they get their start, and what was their root in music?
Yeah, well, his family, much like mine back in the 50s and 60s, my dad had a record player and played records all the time. His parents did the same thing. But the big thing we had back then was AM radio, a little transistor radio. I used to listen to WLA outside of Chicago because I could pick it up at night on a clear channel and could hear all this music I couldn't hear growing up, because they played rock and roll. And I grew up in Mississippi, like I said before, and all they had in Mississippi was gospel or country. And I had to wait till nighttime to pick up WLS. And Jimmie talks about that in the film, about listening to your AM radio. And then you could actually go to a teen club and hear a live band actually playing instruments. They didn't put on didn't have a DJ spinning records. They had people actually playing instruments. And so we grew up around that, and I did too. I just didn't get to be as good a guitar player as they did. But we all had music around the home, and also the big thing was that was how you went and met other kids or met girls. You went to a dance where there was a live band, and you could meet girls there. It wasn't like you could go on Facebook or Tinder. You had to get out of the house. People, And so that was a big part of it, was this kind of energy about being in in a gymnasium and hear a live band play and ask on a girl to dance.
Right.
So, and one of the things that I think that sort of that dovetails with is I always, especially Stevie Ray, because he is a guitar legend. Mm-hmm. When people talk about Hendrix and Clapton, and Stevie Ray is right there with them, right? So you sort of think of them as this just absurdly talented individual, and they surely are that. But what I've got from the movie, and maybe you could talk about this, is that talent has to be unlocked through hours and hours of practice, and sort of, talk a little bit about the boys and sort of what their life was like after they discovered guitar.
Well, they had to learn how to play. And back then, you didn't, and we showed this in the film, you couldn't go on YouTube and learn how to play a song, and you couldn't rent a VHS tape. You had to just sit down and play the record, listen to it, and try to recreate that on your guitar, note for note. And if you had a friend who already learned that song, he would show you how to play it. And we talk about that in the film. And they practiced for hours. We had his cousin, they had their cousin, Connie Trent Briggs, and she said they would practice for hours because they were both just very dedicated to it. And that's what it took. They had an innate talent. There's no doubt about that. But they also put in the time. There was a theory about 10,000 hours, that you got to do 10,000 hours of anything to be good at it. And through that repetition, they were self-taught and their repetition, and they started doing it at such an early age. And I mean, they were already making money playing music when they were 13 or 14. I mean, how many friends you have when they're 14 say, I'm going to leave home and go become a professional musician, and yet they're 2 weeks later, they're back at the school.
Right.
But that
both dropped out of high school, never finished high school, and they were able to make a living playing guitar,
right away. And the age that you just mentioned, I think that applied to Jimmie. I mean, I would know if my 14-year-old said, I'm going to go be a professional musician, I'm leaving. I mean, I can't even.
The answer would be no. You can continue to practice, but not yet.
I can't even fathom that. But he was that talented and that driven. And so it's interesting because we were talking off camera a little bit. And I think you said Jimmie is now in his 70s. And he still seems that talented and driven. I mean, all these years later. So
we saw him not long ago, and I don't know, it's been a
couple years, I think. Yeah.
And he was amazing. And I really kind of thought, I want to see him. I never have, but he's in his 70s. I don't really expect a lot. No, it was fantastic. And one of the first concerts where I was right at the stage. And so I could see him play and the skill up close. And there is nothing like that.
I agree. And the thing is, he still brings it. I mean, he didn't go out there and mail it in.
No.
I won't mention her name, but I saw some older performers when I was a buddy, were still playing. They kind of just went through the motions, like that, and we're getting a check. He still brings it. And even, like he told me, he says, come Friday night, I'm going to be playing somewhere. I will still always have a gig,
Yeah.
It is amazing. We talked about this before. We're big concert goers, and just the drive, what is inside those people that are entertainers, are true entertainers, is just, it's otherworldly to me. I can't imagine being that accomplished, having every skin on the wall that you can have on the wall. In the interviews, the Grammys are sitting behind him right there. But yet he's still out gigging clubs. That is just amazing to me.
Well, to have something in your life that you're that passionate about, that's what it's about.
Right.
I mean, few of us get that opportunity in life.
The story about that I got was he was playing in Dallas one time, and he had a young guy playing upright bass for him. And I said, what's it like? You're 24 and you're playing with Jimmie. He's like 68. What's it like? He goes, he's been doing what he wanted to do since he was 13. He says, how many people could say that?
Right.
So there's a lot about Oak Cliff, and I thought the film just does a fantastic. Again, it's brothers in blues. And it does a fantastic job of setting that scene. But as you mentioned, they end up in Austin, And it does another fantastic job in talking about the Austin music scene and sort of how they work their way up there. So talk a little bit about that aspect of it, and so that wasn't your home turf. Did that involve a lot of research, or how did you recreate that for us?
Well, I have driven down to Austin quite a bit when I was a buddy. Stoney and I would drive down there to catch bands. And I always wanted Jimmie and we do this in the film, he gets one of his antique cars and drives us around Austin. So I want you to show me all the clubs you and Stevie played when y'all were starting out. And obviously most of them are gone now, but the buildings are still there. And so he drove us around and showed us about the clubs and what they did. And his first gig was at a place called the One Night, that's now Stubbs Barbecue. And they just offered to play there on Monday nights if they could just get a gig there, and they did. And then they went and played the Roam Inn, which was a pizza place back then. They had live music on Sundays and Mondays. Sunday night, Stevie played, and Monday night, the Thunderbirds played with Jimmie. And he showed us that place. And then obviously the big place where they really broke out was Antone's, which is still around. It's not the same location, but it's still a hugely popular club, and people come from all over the world to go there. But he drove us to the original location and showed us that. And at that time, they weren't making much money because, like I said, Austin clubs just didn't pay much. You could always get a place to play, but you couldn't get much money. But they just, put out and played. And I remember we got a good scene where Mike Buck talks about when they were playing the Roam Inn every Monday. He goes, I remember the first time we made $50 a night. He says, oh my God, we're going to all go buy new shoes.
Well, and so the Roam Inn, I just wanted to segue right there. It became known as a great blues set. And you've got Billy Gibbons Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top talking about going down there and all the characters that would watch them play at the Roam Inn. And we recently, and I'm going to mess the name up, but the guy that owns the Continental Club in Austin got his start in the club business at Roam Inn. And he has opened a blues club at the end of South Congress that's called, I think it's called PJ's. I'm not sure.
Yes, C-Boys. Yes.
Right.
He worked at the Roam Inn and they named it C-Boys. And C-Boys was the guy that was the cook at the Roam Inn.
Right.
And he named it after him. And and Billy Gibbons wrote with ZZ Top, wrote and recorded a song about going to see the Thunderbirds play at the Roam Inn.
Right.
It's called Go Down in the Streets. And you wouldn't know that song was about the Thunderbirds of the Roam Inn unless you knew the story behind it. And I had been told that was what the song was about. So I had to get Billy Gibbons on camera to tell me, what is this song about and who are the people you name on it, like that. And he went down the list. And so that to me is the ultimate accolade, that you're such a cool performer that ZZ Top writes a song about it.
Right.
Well, and so I just thought it was cool that, the Roam Inn is now some sort of bakery or whatever, that it does still live on, and they play blues at C-Boys, and we spent a night listening to some great
entire night there. Yes.
Listening to some great blues there. So let me ask you, your comment there raised a question. You just threw it off. Like, so I had to get Billy Gibbons on camera, like Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top, and you're in a film about Stevie Ray Vaughan. You were talking about the two biggest non-country musicians to ever come out of Texas. How do you get Billy Gibbons on camera? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's because he and Jimmie have been close friends since they were 15. As we tell in the film, they were playing clubs in Texas at the same time when they were 15 years old. And they would play, they shared a stage down in Houston at a club called the Catacombs. And I just just asked Jimmie, I said, I need your help. And he said, okay. And so I contacted Billy Gibbons' manager, and he said, yeah, he'll meet you. We shot that at the Horseshoe Arena out in Midland, Texas, before ZZ Top did a concert there. We shot Billy Gibbons' interview there, and he wanted to be involved because he has such admiration for both Jimmie and Stevie. They were all playing the same club circuit when they were younger. And he was just very forthcoming, I thought. And I mean, when you see the film, he doesn't hold much back. And he expresses his admiration for both the players, where he said they have cracked the code. They know how to do it, you know. And I got that interview, and Eric Clapton and Jackson Browne, and now I all through Jimmie Vaughan, because once he signed on to help me with the film, he made a few phone calls and opened the doors for me, and I could never have done that without his help, and I'm eternally grateful.
Well, and you are so lucky. I mean, when I saw the film and I'm thinking, Eric Clapton is one of my all-time favorites. Jackson Browne, I'm like, this is royalty. You got to talk to royalty when it comes to music, and especially guitarists. They are unbelievable.
So on a personal note, are you real nervous when you do those interviews?
Well, I try not to show it. And the hardest thing for me to do was when I asked them a question and they took off on another story added to it. I kept pinching my legs saying, "Don't interrupt them. Let them go. Let them go." Because your tendency is to say, "Well, wait a minute. Tell me about that." I just tried to let them go and talk, and like I said, I just kept biting my tongue, saying, "Do not interrupt them," because I knew we were catching some really wonderful moments there. And that's another thing people don't understand is how many famous people worked with Stevie and Jimmie. They know Stevie and Jimmie, but they didn't, like most people don't know that Texas Flood, Stevie's first album, was recorded at Jackson Browne's studio. Jackson Browne gave them the studio time for free to record Texas Flood, and all these famous people that recognized their talent and wanted, to be around them. And I was hoping that kind of came through, like rock royalty, but the rock royalty, they were hip to the Vaughan brothers.
Right.
and it did, I will assure you, it came through in the film. Yes. I got that loud and clear, and I knew, as soon as I saw Eric Clapton was in it, I knew M'lissa was that.
And you had me hook, line, and sinker.
And Jackson Browne was sort of a different person than I would have imagined him. Just more real chill, he seemed like.
Oh, yeah, but everybody we talked to was extremely gracious and kind. And some people say, "Well, how did you get him to talk?" And I said, I think because Stevie died 30 years ago, they've been waiting for 30 years to tell this story, and they never told it till now. And I think they were ready to. They weren't ready to talk about it right after Stevie died, and they probably wouldn't have talked about it 10 years later. But the passage of time, they were ready to talk, and I would just. I don't know if you want to call it a God thing or what, but I think the good Lord was looking out for me because we captured some incredible interviews on there, and I'm very, very proud of that.
And you should be. And I'm not going to reveal everything that's in the film, but Jackson Browne and Eric Clapton, they were good friends with the Vaughan brothers, and obviously Stevie died in the crash, but they also had people on their teams in the helicopter that went down. So just a enormous tragedy for them. They lost friends, co-workers, and all of that. And what it is about flying things and rock stars, I don't know, but it's just, yeah.
Well, and it's such a tragedy because they are able to express what so many of us feel, and we don't have the ability to express that and to be able to relate to a musician like that, and then to be able to capture it as you did in your film is really, it makes us feel like we're sitting in their living room talking to them. And that's what I love.
So
it's probably very hard to capture that, but I appreciate you picked up on that. Yeah.
Because I wanted to be in the living room with you. And I just like in this interview with you, I just love listening to you. I don't have that much to say because it's just so fascinating. And next time you make one, will you call me and I'll go and I'll be a listener with you?
So you mentioned, and M'lissa sort of picked up on it. What I was surprised when I was getting ready for the interview, I went back and looked at some things. And Stevie Ray Vaughan died in 1990. That was 34 years ago. And it's like he's frozen in time. He feels present now. And in a way that maybe some celebrities that died young don't. I mean, that stunned me that it was that long ago. What is it about him, do you think, gives him that sort of ongoing presence?
Well, for one thing, when you hear Stevie Ray come on the radio or on record, you immediately know that's him.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Elvis. When you're Elvis, you don't have to say, who is that? That's Elvis. You don't have to say, who's that playing guitar? That's Stevie. He had a style and a way to play that was totally his, and he put all that energy and emotion into playing that it's not duplicated. And so you're not hearing somebody else and wondering who that is playing. And I think he was also driven after he got out of rehab. I think he was trying to, in some way, I'm putting words in people's mouths, but I think he was trying to make up for lost time. That he realized that I've been playing great, but I could be doing more. Mm-hmm. And so I think like we closed the movie with "Life by the Drop," which I think is an incredible song, and it's just Stevie with a 12-string guitar. And then we also had the song, "TikTok." There was one of the last songs Stevie recorded with Jimmie. And those are just two very moving songs. I don't think anybody can listen to either song and say, well, that was nothing. Right. They both have an emotion to them, but he had such a, unique is an overused word, he had such an energy and power and emotion that you don't ever mistake him for somebody else. And like you said, he still sounds fresh all these years later. It just still, that you're thinking, oh my God, how did he do that?
Well, that brings me to talk about the soundtrack and how you chose the songs that you chose for the documentary.
Well, I didn't get to choose all of them. There were two songs I really wanted to include in this film, but I couldn't get the music clearances for them. And that's something people don't understand. You can listen to any song you want on your phone, pull it up on YouTube or Spotify. But when you want to use that movie in a TV show, a movie, or commercial, you've got to go get the clearances from them. You got to get two sets of clearances. One, the master recording, that's the song itself, and two, the publishing rights. Whoever wrote that song has got to give you a clearance too. And in the case of the song "Life by the Drop," it was written by two different people, represented by two different publishing companies. So to play that song, I had to get 3 lists of clearances. They want money for it because they don't make any money off streaming. They make money off selling music clearances, and they are not giving it away. And there were 2 songs I wanted to include in there. One of them was "Scratch My Back." The Thunderbirds did. It was on their first album, and I love that song. But I couldn't get the publishing clearance on it. The master recordings I got by the publishing house, they wanted so much money, I couldn't afford it. I just said, I cannot pay that. I'm not Martin Scorsese. I had to yank that song. The other one was "Cat People," the song that David Bowie recorded on "Let's Dance." And I thought that was the best example of Stevie's guitar playing on that whole album. But I couldn't get the publishing house to clear it for me. I got the recording rights from David Bowie's estate. But that song was written by Giorgio Moroder, and his estate would not give me permission to use it. So I had to pull both those songs. And the songs I got, I had to pay. Let me just put this in perspective for everybody watching out there. I shot that entire film, shot it, edited it, put it together, and finished it for less than $13,000. After I had to pay for the music clearances and get the lawyers to sign off on it, I spent another $150,000 just for music clearances, lawyer fees, and E&O insurance, Arizona emissions insurance. And so it is just so hard to get a song to be included in a production today. You've got to be super rich or have a major studio behind you, like Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody. They had a major studio. I'm an independent filmmaker, and I can't be throwing $500,000 out there for a song and like that. But you can hear all the music you want for nothing on your phone.
Right. Well, that just made me think about you and what you do, and truly a passion project. And I think that's the other thing that comes across in both the films that we've talked about with you is they've truly been passion projects, something that is very personal to you, which makes it even more fun to watch. I feel like I got to know a little bit about you in watching it.
Well, thank you. And yeah, they both were, you've got to have a passion for it. It can't be just a job. And I guess if I could be so bold, it's art. You're creating art. And you got to be passionate about being an artist. But I had seen the Vaughan brothers, start out in dumping clubs and get to the top. And I just kept telling myself, this is an amazing story. These 2 kids who came from nowhere, a little cracker box house in Oak Cliff with an alcoholic father, and just they went to the very top. And Eric Clapton, Billy Gibbons, Jack, all wanted to be with them. And I just thought, this is an amazing tale. It's got to be told. And I just did not think it had been told the way I saw it. I mean, there's some really good books about Stevie and Jimmie, and there's other stuff, and those are all good. But I just saw it from a different perspective than most people because I was around to see most of it. And like I tell people, I say, you already know what happened. I'm trying to show you how it happened.
Well, you did. You did. Yeah. You definitely did. And just a little bit on the how. Talk a little bit. You touched on it earlier when you said without Jimmie, there'd be no Stevie Ray. Talk a little bit about sort of the. It was interesting to me, the love and the sibling rivalry. Sort of talk a little bit about that tension there.
Right. Well, there seems to be what I noticed when I was working on this film, and the comments I get from people that see it, people who weren't around back then, they have an attitude like, Stevie good, Jimmie bad. Mm-hmm. Jimmie was the mean older brother, like that. Mm-hmm. But, I never saw that. When I saw them together, they supported each other and they were backstage each other's shows. I never saw this antagonism. Mm-hmm. But I can say that having had a younger brother of my own, there are things that happen between brothers where your younger brother can really piss you off. And you get angry and do something in the heat of anger, and people think, oh, he hates his brother. Mm. And, I know that one time my younger brother picked up a baseball bat and hit me with it. He got so mad at me. But, we shared an apartment together. We got to be grown and we loved each other. And there was the same way between Jimmie and Stevie. Some people may have witnessed an outburst between them, but, all families have that, where there's a moment where you're not really proud of your behavior, but the family love is still there. And I just saw nothing but admiration between both of them. And I never saw this antagonism or anything like that. And some people say that, but I'm like, well, I didn't see that. And then we have Nile Rodgers on there quoting, he's on there saying, he said there was nothing but admiration between these two guys. I did not see a hint of jealousy. And he recorded Family Style with them, was in the studio with them, so he ought to know what he's talking about.
And so for the people that aren't as immersed maybe in this as we all might be, talk a little bit about what the Family Style album was and sort of the timing of it.
Yeah, well, they both become big stars, and they always wanted to make an album together. Even when I was at Buddy Magazine back in the 70s, Jimmie told me once, and I had it quoted in Buddy Magazine, he said, what I really want to do is make an album with Stevie. And they finally got a chance to do that, and CBS Records put up the money and put them in the studio like that. And so they got to make one together, and that was the last recording Stevie Ray Vaughan ever made, was with his brother, because Stevie died before that album came out. Mm-hmm. Jimmie had to go and mix the album after his brother died, which
wow.
is, I don't know if I could do that.
Right. No.
They had wanted to record an album together, and I don't know, they kind of pulled out stuff that each one wanted to do on that. And they had a tremendous producer, Nile Rodgers, who's a genius in the studio, I think. If you don't believe that, pull out David Bowie's Let's Dance and play that. Mm-hmm. But there was something they wanted to do all their lives, and they finally got the record label to agree to do it, and they did it. And then Stevie dies, much like James Dean. He makes Giant, then he dies before it comes out. Stevie records Family Style and dies before the album's released. So it's a real tragedy, but it was something they wanted to do because of their love for each other.
Right, and I thought it gave your movie, a real narrative arc to it. That at the end, it is of course one of the great tragedies of the music industry, but at least they got to do what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So yes. I thought that was awesome. And again, so the movie is Brothers in Blues. How can people have to watch this movie? If you're a Texan, if you're a music lover, if you're a blues lover, if you want to know about what it was like in the 60s and 70s to be a teenager, there's just so many different things it hits. So I think there's a wide audience for us. Tell us about how people can watch Brothers in Blues.
You can stream it on a lot of platforms, I'm proud to say. You can stream it on Amazon, you can stream it on iTunes, Apple TV, Fandango, used to be called Vudu, and even there are DVDs for sale on Amazon if you want to buy a DVD. Basically, we're on about every streaming platform except Netflix. And so if you just go do a search for it, you should find your streaming platform, like I say, Amazon, iTunes, Apple TV, even YouTube, and Fandango, or formerly Vudu. So we got a lot of outlets for you to go watch it. And I would, and because I majored in history at Baylor, I felt it was important to include a lot of the history of that era, because Stevie and Jimmie were shaped by what was going on in America at that time, and watching the Beatles and Ed Sullivan, going to teen clubs, going to record stores, all these things that are gone now, that most people have no idea ever existed. I'm trying to give people a sense of time and place of the era they grew up in. And I hope that came across.
It did, and how it impacted their lives. It really did.
And so Oak Cliff is sort of in. Oak Cliff has had its ups and downs in Dallas in terms of how prosperous it is. It's currently on an uptick. There's all sorts of swanky things you can see and do, and it's a beautiful area of Dallas.
Go to Bishop Arts District,
right,
all of that
stuff. But I absolutely loved the pictures of the 60s and 70s of the just the clubs and the there's a Texas Theater picture in there, and just all sorts of stuff that took you to what old Dallasites would say, that's Oak Cliff.
Well, and just that era, I looked at some of the pictures. It was like looking at my sister's yearbooks. They're a little bit older than I am, and it was very nostalgic for me. And so there's so many people who would love that experience. And then younger people, it's always so much fun to see what that generation before you was like. So it was great.
So one last...
iPhone back then.
Right. No iPhones.
No iPhones. So one last story about Oak Cliff and the Vaughan brothers. And I didn't know this until I watched the movie. It was amazing to me. Tell us a little bit, after Stevie got sober, he's one of the biggest music stars in the world, what he did about his living arrangements.
He came back to Oak Cliff to live in that little frame house that he grew up in. His mother still lived there. It's on Glenfield Avenue, just 4 blocks from Keys Park, a little wooden frame house. After he got sober, he came back and lived with her in Oak Cliff. There, and he could have lived anywhere, but he chose to go back to Glenfield Avenue and live with his mom in a little wooden frame house, and just back to his roots. I thought that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing too, and I just thought it tied the movie together. Like I said, you're so great at giving a sense of place to it, and I thought that little detail about it was just remarkable, and it did tie it to Oak Cliff. So.
Well, Kirby, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. And it's been great talking to you and seeing the man behind the camera and behind the ideas.
Right. And I'm going to encourage everybody to go out and stream Brothers in Blues. Like Kirby said, it's available on all sorts of streaming platforms. It is, how long's the runtime on it?
It's right at an hour and 46. It's 106 minutes. I think that's 1 hour and 46 minutes.
Okay, and it'll be the best 2 hours that you spend all week. I guarantee it. And after you've done that, if you'll like, share, subscribe, all the social media things for Texas 10, we would appreciate that. And keep coming back to us for great stories about Texas, like the ones that Kirby Warnock tells.
Thank you, Kirby.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye. And sick 'em Bears.
From the heart of the hill country